We are now live. And greetings, good morning, happy Wednesday. On Monday of this week, over 400 hospitals in the UHC chain were hit with a ransomware attack and had their systems entirely shut down and had to go to paper-based system. That follows on the heels, of course, of the news from 2 weeks ago that a person had died in Germany as a result of a hospital ransomware attack. And just on Monday, ZDNet posted a story that a group called the REVIL cyber hackers had posted $1 million online with the ransomware as a service to the best contestant to win the prize of deploying their ransomware. Cybersecurity is a growing and serious problem. In March of this past year, Security Today wrote an article entitled "The Next Victims." And the story was about trucking fleets saying that they would be the next targets of cyber security hacks and ransomware. In 2019 alone, ransomware cost United States businesses over $8 billion. This is not a new problem. Just this past May, IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy awarded the University of California, San Diego professor Stefan Savage their Test of Time award for the enduring impact of an article he wrote in 2010, a decade ago, entitled "The Experimental Security of the Modern Automobile." It generated tremendous interest at DOT and NHTSA, and set off a flurry of activity on how the transportation sector could address obvious and serious cyber issues. And yet, here we are, 10 years later. The question is, have we fallen in love with the problem, or is there a solution that we can talk about where Omni Air Consortium members can provide help? So this morning, to be part of our discussion, we have four, and I'm hoping 5 panel members, 4 panel members and myself, starting with my dear friend Faye Francy, who now runs the Automotive ISAC. Hello, Faye. Matt Yarger with IOTA Foundation in Austin, Texas. Char Watson, who is a Senior Cybersecurity Advisor with AECOM. And all the way from Spain, Jorge Wallace, who is the Chief Cybersecurity Investigator from DEKRA. And guys, what I would like to do, other than avoid the contentiousness of stepping on each other's statements or calling people clowns like occurred last night in Cleveland, Ohio, is start off with each of you giving just a very short background on what your organization does and why it should matter to our audience this morning, which is predominantly Omni Air members. Faye, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you, David. Greetings, everyone. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here on the stage with many other great colleagues, and of course with David, who I've known for many years. So we are the Auto ISAC, and we are a nonprofit organization out of Washington, D.C. We were formed by a number of many of you, which are automotive members. That includes all of the OEMs, Tier 1, Tier 2 suppliers that go across the entire global ecosystem.
Have to filter the questions
so there were 14.
Faye, hang on 1 second.
Char, we're live, so
we are
I guess
live.
that's the best we can do.
Char, can we get you to go on mute just a second while you're working out the technical glitch? There we go. Go ahead, Faye.
Okay, so we came together, the industry basically came together, and many of the members that are in the Auto ISAC are also in Omni Air. In fact, I'm very good friends with Jason, and we talk quite a bit. We share information, and he's come in and presented to our group and vice versa, and I've seen what you do with the cybersecurity working group and so forth. What we do is primarily focus on cybersecurity and all aspects of it. And we basically are a tactical threat intelligence sharing platform. And so our members that join get intel from other members, which is really the best data that we can get, because we know real time what's happening across the automotive global ecosystem. We also work together to educate and train our members about things like ransomware. David brought that up. There's a tremendous attack against the industry and against many people. It's just very lucrative for the bad actors to gain a lot of money and to really hold folks ransom. It has certainly happened in the automotive industry already. It's happened quite a bit. It's certainly happened on the trucking, the heavy vehicle, as well as the light duty side. In June, there was an announcement of a ransomware attack on Honda, and it hit their manufacturing plant as well. So it's across the board, and it is really a problem. And so what we try to do as an industry and our platform is to really support our membership, educate them. We have community calls where we bring in folks from external to the organization, folks like NIST and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework to learn about that, MITRE, the MITRE attack framework. We are actually building a automotive attack framework. We brought in NTIA, for instance, Dr. Alan Friedman, if you know him. He's working on building what they call SBOM, which is a software bill of materials, very important in cyber to understand what is in the platform or the vehicle. And we are building an automotive SBOM now. So through our activities within the ISAC. So it's not just threat intelligence sharing, it's also sharing and learning and helping the whole of industry to understand how to thwart the threat and to build resiliency and to help educate each other.
So Faye, quickly, when you said tactical information, define what that means and what a typical product would be that an OmniAir member could actually use for something other than just pure situational awareness.
Well, for the membership, the tactical piece is whatever's happening in real time, we share immediately, right? We try to, early and often, as I call it, we try to share what's happening. Has anybody seen this kind of activity? Maybe it's a nefarious activity, maybe it's a DDoS, maybe it's potentially a ransomware. So we try to share that information and see who else might be seeing it, not only inside the ISAC membership, but we do go to our partners. We do go to Department of Homeland Security, to the FBI, to some of our government partners as well. And so we go to other ISACs, which is very valuable. So we are a member of the National Council of ISACs, and there are many ISACs in IT, communications, financial services, across the board, aviation, and we share information. And the reason that's so valuable is a lot of these threat actors use the same tactics, techniques, and procedures across one company to another, because it works, and across one sector to another. So it's really helpful to share that type of information, like what happened recently that you just mentioned in the hospital. Very important that we learn about that, right? Very important that we understand the details of what that is, and then how we can build mitigation techniques against it. And so that sharing of that tactical information is invaluable to building that resiliency.
So great. So Matt, tell us a little bit about IOTA and not IOTA, IOTA. Washington is a town built on TLAs, which is 3-letter acronyms, or FLA, which is not Florida, 4-letter acronyms. And tell us what in your military cyber background and experience you've been able to translate that will help you in the blockchain distributed system and will help the OmniAir members. Again, more than just situational awareness. What is the so what for OmniAir and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'll start with a quick about me. For those that aren't familiar with me in the space, I am the head of automotive and mobility at the IOTA Foundation. Prior to joining the IOTA Foundation, I was active duty Army. I did 8 years active duty. I was stationed at the National Security Agency. I did cybersecurity and cyber operations planning. And then I did digital forensics and blockchain research at the Department of Defense Cybercrime Center. And one of the things you see in this space is we're constantly being reactive. And from a cybersecurity perspective, it's always responding to an event and having situational awareness. But if we're always being reactive, then we're always trying to play catch up. it's hard to actively prevent things that are going to happen in the future if your adversary is always 2 steps ahead of you when it comes to new technologies and new capabilities. So when I looked into IOTA in the blockchain space, I saw some really interesting things. I saw distributed systems, I saw mathematical consensus, I saw immutable data, which offers tamper-proof capabilities, and I saw that coming together in unique ways. A lot of the blockchain technologies out there, they're great for what they're targeted for, but when it comes to cybersecurity and distributed systems at scale, they don't operate because they don't scale to the type of systems that we need in the mobility space. And they don't really enhance what is known as zero trust architecture, zero trust models. But one of the things that's different with IOTA is they do data and value. So there's a scalable data aspect that goes all the way to the edge. They focus on embedded and hardware enforced solutions. They're focused on blockchain integrations or distributed ledger integrations for IoT spaces, and mobility is a very ideal case of IoT in action. And they focus on trying to bring these data and immutability capabilities and tamper-proof capabilities to the edge. So they're a nonprofit, they're based in Berlin, and everything we do is open source. We work with a number of partners in the mobility space, a number of OEMs and hardware providers, things of that nature. But what it comes down to is how can we start to use these new technologies to start to be proactive and start to build a better system that scales and secures the data from the edge in? Because if we can build something that's lightweight, that can go into the data, into the vehicles, and that can have hardware enforcement and things of that nature, it's a lot easier to scale them up with more compute than it is to scale them down with less compute. So it's more of a fringe in methodology than a cloud out methodology. And I think for the mobility space, that's really what we have to do. We have to focus on how do we create something that can operate in a constrained environment, that enforces security, that heightens the way that we operate and the way that we design our systems. And then how can we start to use that to bring the industry together? And that's one thing the IOTA Foundation is very good at. We're operating in a number of consortiums with a number of open source organizations and people and organizations in all kinds of different industries. But it's about bringing different stakeholders that don't necessarily trust each other all the time. They don't want to share all their data with each other because there's business logic that comes down to that, that they're putting at risk. There's IP that they're putting at risk. And they want to find a way to protect the users and the consumers of their products, but in a way that's not going to completely demolish their business. Because as we all know, cybersecurity can be very expensive. And putting in new cybersecure solutions is a lot of overhead for organizations that don't necessarily see the ROI up front. They see there's a reactive way of, after I got hacked or after they took advantage of our database vulnerabilities and everything. Now we see that we need to do this, but if we can start to be proactive and put in scalable, feeless, and permissionless technologies, it can start to address this problem up front, and it can prepare us with a better system, a better solution. So when it comes to securing your business logic, sharing data with the other stakeholders in your industry, having a way to verify, because zero trust requires verification, never trust, always verify. So how can we verify that in a transparent way while ensuring stakeholders and organizations in the space are still protecting their IP, but sharing what's necessary for them to start to trust each other and come together for standards and common platforms? And then how can we enable this interoperability at scale? Because right now the industry is still working towards hardware interoperability. We see that with DSRC and ITSG5 very commonly. But in the future, we're going to have to start to work towards software interoperability and application interoperability. And that's really difficult if we're still trying to figure out the hardware side. So having this like secure network capability, the secure data capability allows you to come together with a common system that nobody necessarily owns. So you don't have to worry about this company having all the rights. You don't have to worry about Tesla having centralized control over all of your systems and locking all their owners out of their cars for an hour. You don't have to worry about those kind of things because those capabilities are decentralized, because no one should have the control to be able to do something like that.
So, Matt, I always feel when I go to a conference in Washington that I should take a cliche bingo card because you keep hearing the same terminology over and over again. Let me pick on two that you mentioned. Number one is zero trust. OmniAir Consortium is in the business of doing certification of hardware communications, and the inference is when it is OmniAir certified, you can trust it to be secure. So how does the zero trust mindset operate in an organization that is built around creating trust? That's number one. And number two, if we're still working on hardware and need to go to software, how can we ever develop the same level of trust in software that we are now developing on the hardware side? And you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, so for the first, zero trust doesn't necessarily mean that you don't trust the system. It means that you have to be aware that there are always going to be vulnerabilities and ways in. So you need a level of transparency, so that when something happens, you're aware of what happens and you can respond accordingly. So it's building that system so that you can be proactive and be reactive when you need to be in a much more efficient way. It's not necessarily saying you shouldn't trust the system or you can't build secure systems, but you need to build it with the thought that there's going to be things that happen. So how do we prepare for that in advance? And then the other aspect of hardware to software interoperability is a little more difficult, but when we're doing things in a proprietary mindset, it's really difficult to get into an interoperability framework. But OmniAir has done a very good job of bringing together different providers in the space for hardware. And as OmniAir continues to develop, I expect to see that they're going to also push towards software certifications and building standards for the industry. So how do we have a metadata standard for saying these are the vehicles, and this is how they send data over a network. This is the type of data they need to send. And these are the OEMs and their data sets. These are the hardware providers and their data sets. What does Bosch need to send versus what does Volkswagen need to send? So coming together and certifying those standards and then going to the OEMs and different hardware providers and saying, yes, they are compliant. They offer the necessary amount of transparency. They can be verified. They can be audited. So the liabilities and everything can be decreased and the risk can be decreased is, I think, a really good step in the right direction.
Excellent. So, Shar, I'm going to come to you next. Jorge, stand by because you're going to back cleanup. Shar, tell us a little bit about your role as a senior security advisor for AECOM, but predominantly what you learned from your previous experience working with universities who never have enough money to be able to do all the things that they need to do and who are budget constrained and have to deal with that culture that Matt mentioned of where is the ROI for putting in protective systems or dealing with the human factors for risk of maybe hurting someone's feelings. And you need to come off mute.
So the universities are a different environment. They're educational institutions for many years, centuries. They have hundreds of years. It's an open, investigative, educative, experimental mindset. And what has happened over the years is we have moved from a society that gathers data, digital data from our physical environment and uses it to make decisions to affect the physical environment, to now where we have the digital truly making changes to the physical environment, right? If you hack a SCADA system or a water system or anything like that, or a university system, you can literally change the environmental controls. You can change your physical environment. You could put people in danger. And understanding that mindset is very difficult to translate at the educational institutions. The other thing is, you're right, educational institutions struggle, particularly brick and mortar schools, and now post-COVID, on obtaining the tuition, the finances, the grants, and everything else like that. What I would say to that is that educational in 2016, and Faye, I was tickled that you mentioned NIST and the risk management framework and the cybersecurity framework. Oh my God, love. Because the Department of Education in 2016 did adopt that. They adopted that as the standard for universities that receive educational funding. So if a university or a state college or a community college is housing personal identifiable information, Department of Education requires that they follow at minimum the cybersecurity framework. That's a given. And if they're found in violation of that, if a hack, as Matt mentioned, happens, right, then they could potentially lose all of their funding. So to deal with the hurt feelings is it's too expensive not to set up security. It's too expensive not to adopt cyber resiliency posture. But people talk about the engaging the stakeholders. It has to be a top-down approach. You guys may disagree with me, but in my experience, I have found it's very nice to say, yes, we need to have a top-down approach. The stakeholders need to lead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That never happens. What happens is the middle tier, such as some sort of associate VP of something, and upper middle management.
Uh-oh. We lost Colin, I think.
Yeah. For those of us who are not lip readers, Char, we cannot hear you any further. Whoops.
Let's give it just 1 second then.
It looks really informative and entertaining. I'm sure it's fantastic information. Stand by. All right, I'll tell you what, Jorge, while we are trying to reestablish comms with Char, who I know feels very passionately about what she's saying, I wish we could hear it. Let's switch over to you. This is not a United States issue. This is a global issue. And DEKRA is well known for having its footprint and operation in so many different places. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing as a cybersecurity advisor at DEKRA and what benefit that is, what OmniAir members need to know about what you're doing.
So first of all, hello from Spain. My name is Jorge Wallace. I'm cybersecurity technical officer, and I belong to the products testing and certification service division. So I'm used to deal with products. From DEKRA Cybersecurity, we are participating in different working groups, including recently created ISO groups for cybersecurity. I'm pretty sure that you will know we are talking about ISO 21434 and so on. And indeed, we were participating in the definition of UNIC regulation as well. In addition to this, we are an accredited lab for common criteria, and we are participating in different working groups for defining security profiles for automotive devices and components. So basically, the service division for product testing is focused on product testing and certification. And when we are approaching automotive devices, we are trying to have a wide approach. As Mathew has mentioned before, we need to take in mind all the different parts of a automotive component, because probably in the end you will find some hardware where you will need some background in hardware hacking or maybe penetration testing techniques. And nowadays even side channel attacks are a common risk that could affect these kind of devices, but you need to have some knowledge in cloud services, APIs, and even mobile application, because they are so common nowadays to have mobile applications in order to take control of some functionalities provided by automotive devices and components. So From DEKRA Cybersecurity, we are right now trying to be in the right standardization groups in order to create services. For instance, we are working in the new services for cybersecurity management system, as well as the new services regarding to updates management system as well. So in my particular case, I have a strong background in product security evaluation in common criteria for high-level security and high assurance, as well as penetration testing for automotive devices.
So, Jorge, Faye and I have previously worked together in the aerospace industry. And last week I was reading a story that there is now an association of standards organizations across the globe who are trying to harmonize the various standards that different countries and different authorities are trying to put together. You mentioned the ISO standards, and I guess there is an ISO SAE 21434 that came out in draft this year.
Well,
why should OmniAir members care what's in a draft standard, and what is DEKRA basically doing to influence those so that we don't have the problems here that we're now seeing on the 5G standard, where you have state-owned interests and claims that cybersecurity is not all that secure when you have to share it with someone outside of the private sector.
The good thing here is that these two main standards regarding to automotive cybersecurity, 21434 and 24089, they are being developed because UNAC regulation. So this is some regulation that will be adopted by 54 countries, I'm pretty sure, but this number is increasing. And if you take a look to the UNICE regulation, the UNICE regulation is mentioning cybersecurity management system as well as software update management system. So in the end, what this ISO standard is doing is just, if you take a look even to the draft standard, you will see that in the particular case of the software update management system, they are just copying and pasting things from the UNICE regulation. So this is true. Being honest, they are doing this, and they are just trying to give this some standardization mechanism with SHAL and so on. I'm pretty sure that you are used to deal with this kind of things, but this is the best thing that is happening right now. There is no standard that probably will not be accepted by some countries. In this particular case, there is an UNICE regulation accepted by 54 countries that is being developed. So finally, in order to obtain type approvals for vehicles, you have two things to do. The first one, probably you will have to have your cybersecurity management system certified, or probably you will need to pass an audit in order to see that you have a cybersecurity management system in place. But probably the best option that you have to comply with is by following ISO 21434.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Char, we're coming back to you because you were just so passionate in what you were saying that we hated to miss it. But let's return to where you were, and specifically get into what AECOM is doing in the automotive sector, because the comments you made about universities, I think, also overlap a lot in the automotive sector of allocation of resources and time and people, and just that experimental attitude among the engineers doesn't always match with the marketing and salespeople. So over to you to finish up.
Great. Well, so what AECOM is attempting to do is we have a very strong higher education investment particularly in DCS Americas in the Southeast region. The team that I'm a part of, Technology Services Group, we have one senior executive who is dedicated solely to creating financial partnerships with state colleges, community colleges, and universities to experiment. And then we have a member of my team who we work together, like we're working right now with a college down in Florida, state college in Florida, that is very close to an area where they're exiting veterans who are looking for retraining to enter the civilian workforce for stackable certifications in these types of industries, in the automotive industry, in the IoT industry, in the artificial intelligence industry. I cannot stress enough the importance of partnerships with private industry, such as the large AECOMs, the Googles, the Amazons, the whoever, to contribute to building programs and buildings and experimental areas, keeping in mind, of course, CUI and export controls and et cetera, and training the pipeline of the individuals, right? Part of NIST is is CSF 171, which is the cybersecurity framework, and NIST 181, which is the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. And it's to the benefit of us all, and in particular, community colleges, state universities, et cetera, to get their NSA, CAE, and partner with these companies to create a pipeline of talented individuals of any age and of minority background or whatever, where they get hands-on experience to build these things. Because if you look at the post-COVID world, autonomous vehicles is going to be the thing, right? It absolutely has to happen. What we've learned from COVID is that frontline individuals, we can't do completely without them, but we can take steps to make sure that they're protected, right? And so the drivers or the transporters or whoever, there's a certain amount that they have to do, but there's a certain amount that can be taken care of by autonomous vehicles. So that brings into play two factors. One, you have a workforce out there that has to be retrained, right? Because they've got to find jobs, because they're going to lose them when autonomous vehicles and AI vehicles come into play. And then you also have to keep it secure. So why not partner with some like AECOM or Amazon or Google or whoever and say, okay, this transportation person that knows all about transportation and knows all about these laws and knows all about how to drive and this, that, and the other, why don't we hire them, put them through a program, re-educate them, retool them, because they have up here in their head how it's been working throughout the years, and so they bring that viewpoint. All we have to do is educate them on the technical piece, right? And so then it's a win-win. There's a myriad of ways it can be done. Did that answer your question, sir?
Well, it does, but it raises a follow-up question, and Jorge, I'll come to you next, is that I love the idea of retraining their head in how the technology works. The problem that we have seen in all transportation, and certainly on the rideshare side, is it's not the car or the technology, it's the lack of trust in other people, which is the problem with going out to restaurants and getting on airplanes or trains or buses or in ride-sharing vehicles. You could have the most perfect technology, but you still haven't addressed the human factors side of when do people feel safe. And if you are in the public policy arena, if you're at DOT or NHTSA or Jorge, any of the groups internationally that you see, they not only are worried about does the technology work, is the software secure, but how do you create confidence in the users that they're not going to be damaged, injured, or have a problem. So Jorge, that wasn't the answer you wanted to give, but
Yeah.
I'll dump it in your lap anyway.
Oh, yeah, no, it's just 1 minute because I'm pretty sure that there are some initiatives that are running right now. For instance, there is the IOXT Alliance created by Google, Amazon, Comcast, and so on. They are doing something quite similar because they have created a certification scheme for IoT devices, and they are doing some trainings, free trainings for students and so on. And in addition to this, they have created a bug bounty for hackers because you can self-certify your product, but anyone can prove that you are grown or something like that. So, and it's important because it's at some point is related to automotive because right now, being honest, we are a member of this alliance, and in addition to this, we are an accredited lab for Amazon security evaluation, and they are considering IOXT certification for Auto SDK for infotainments using Alexa and so on, and they will be using this certification for these products. That's all.
Yeah, Char, go ahead.
David, can you hear me? Yeah, I might also add, and Jorge is right on. The other thing is, too, we have to remember we have both generational differences and we have post-COVID differences. And the millennial generation and younger, 60%, last I read, doing research for this panel, are really not interested in owning a car. Most of them live in metropolitan areas where they rely on buses and trains and trolleys and bicycles, whatever, because they're younger. They want to be in a more metropolitan environment. They are very concerned about the environment. They're very concerned about the cities and keeping things beautiful, et cetera, and kudos to them. So you have a generational gap between the millennials and then the late 30s, 40-something plus all the way into my generation. I won't speak to anybody else age-wise. But the point is they're not interested in owning personal vehicles. They're interested in some sort of rideshare. I mean, why is Uber and Lyft so fantastically successful? So the point is, post-COVID, is how do we create this environment where we're checking for temperatures and et cetera, which AECOM actually does have and has done the research with Columbia to look at applications. So if the train, for instance, in New York is running busier than usual and there's the volume of people on it is higher than usual, and so the 6-foot social distancing may not work, then you can schedule your ride. I mean, we're in a brand new world, and we're going to have to take these things into consideration.
So, Faye, I'll come to you in 1 second, but I want to go to what just optically appears to be the two youngest members of our panel, and that's Matt and Jorge. Matt, you live in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
People don't take public transit. Even in Austin, Texas, they love their trucks. Some of them actually may even drive cars. Not many, from my experience, but they may. So are we in a new post-COVID world where the condition of the vehicle, the software that runs it, the autonomous systems are more readily acceptable to folks out of the major urban areas? And Jorge, while Matt's formulating his answer, how does that differ in Europe and in the footprint that you see, where there is far more established culture in riding public transit, even in non-urban areas? So Matt, to you first, and then Jorge.
Yeah, so I'll preface with the fact that we are based in Berlin, so I have a pretty good understanding of the European system as well, since most of the organizations I work with are European. But from an Austin perspective and from a generational perspective, yeah, automation is more readily accepted from what we've seen. There's not a fear about the automation. They just want to know that things work. It's kind of like, why do people choose Zoom, other things? Because they know it's just going to work. and it does really good at that. And then there's an environmental perspective. So if it's automated and it's electrified, then that's great. There's a huge like acceptance of that kind of movement. But from a system perspective, they want to make sure that the systems and the supply chains and everything too are also sustainable, that we're building towards not just vehicles that are sustainable, but how do we build the batteries? How do we verify what they're made out of? How do you get the different products around from the different nations and locations to come together and build this product? So the automation side, yeah, for sure. The public transit side, the problem is we don't really have public transit in Austin. We don't have trains or light rails or anything. We might have one or two, but they are putting in a really big transit plan. So hopefully over the next 10 years, that's going to change. And from what I've seen and from a generational context, the reliance on vehicles is high, but the openness to getting rid of vehicles and using public transit is definitely starting to shift. So there's a lot more demand for why don't we have this? Why don't we have a train system? Why wasn't that built in? Because it's 2020 and we've got over 2.5 million people in the general area, and transportation is getting increasingly worse because we have to rely on single occupancy vehicles. So as you make those easier, but also safer, and you can have a way to verify that this is a trustable process, you don't have to worry about getting in the car with some guy or some girl that might take advantage of you or something like that, then that shift is going to definitely happen.
Jorge, over to you.
Yeah, obviously it's a curious question, and probably the answer is not so easy. So for instance, here I used to work in Malaga, and usually here you will see more people using their own car. But I was trying to think about my own team. So in my own team, I'm thinking the young people of my team more focused on penetration testing and so on. I'm pretty sure that only one of maybe 9 is using their own car. This is the answer right now, no? And if you take a look to other more bigger cities, here in Malaga we are 1 million population, so it's not so small city. But if you take a look to Malaga or to Madrid or Barcelona, you will see that probably 70-80% of people are using public transportation because it works very well, and reality is that even older people are more used to use public transportation as well.
So Char, to you, and then to Faye. Oh, I thought, Char, you raised your hand.
I would agree with what both of them said, actually. It does depend on the regional location or the area location. However, I would say in the United States, Mathew is very correct. That's where it's going. The other thing that as someone who gives the appearance on camera as being the older generation, I would say, having lived by myself for a number of years, as I age, there's a need for public transportation. There will come a day when I was a former paramedic in my life, previous life. I was a paramedic for 25 years, and there does come a time when a person, their reaction time behind the wheel is slower, their ability to respond is a lot slower to foresee what's coming. And so there will come a time, I know, when I will not be able to drive or even should not drive. And how do I get to doctor's appointments? How do I get my groceries? How do I continue to live a very healthy and robust life, even though I cannot drive a personal vehicle? And there are areas in the United States, Florida, Alabama, whatever, where you have large communities of older persons, but there is still no way for them to have public transportation. And so it's not just a technological problem that must be solved, it's a sociological problem that must be solved.
So yes, and at the risk of trying to boil the ocean to make a cup of tea here, it is a serious problem, which I think is driving autonomy in addition to economics and others. And Faye, the title of this panel was Automotive Cybersecurity, but I intentionally went into public transit because there is similar problems, maybe even greater problems in networked vehicles in public transit than in individual owned vehicles. So from your standpoint, what are you seeing top level in terms of the information threats or the information sharing about threats, vulnerabilities? And then Matt, I want to come to you to drill down into the specifics of blockchain and distributed ledger that will help folks that whose vehicles are networked. Faye, to you first.
Thanks, David. And I'll just tee up a little bit from the last conversation as well. So automotive is a fascinating industry right now. In fact, it's really dynamic. It's a very exciting place to be. I believe it's the shift for our next generation that will be as big as the Industrial Revolution. And I mean that wholeheartedly because this thing is going places that we can't even imagine right now. Today, or last year, 40,000 people in the US were killed in automobile accidents. And 98 or 95%, I can't remember the exact number, were caused by human error, right? So we know those numbers. And if you look at aviation, we would never accept those numbers. That would be like the equivalent of 230 737s going down. We would never tolerate that. And yet we have tolerated it here. But we do know that is coming, and that's what I think a lot of them were talking about, not only just from the ease of use, the need, what the millennial want, and the new generation, the older generation as well, but we need it because of the sheer numbers that have been quoted, right? The numbers are changing dynamically. You know, I'm really old, so when I was born, there was 2.25 billion people in the world. Now there's over 7 billion. So from that perspective, we definitely need, transportation, mobility. Mobility is really the key word here, not transportation anymore. We need mobility, and that mobility is going to take various shapes, forms. It's going to impact the smart cities. It's going to impact aviation. It's going to impact what we know is the automotive industry quite dramatically. This gets to a longer term vision of where are we going, where are we heading, and autonomy is definitely coming, and integration into these smart cities means everything will be networked, right? So once you've got all this network stuff happening, that's great news. We bring in greater efficiencies, things that will really make all of us happy. But we also bring in cyber risk because of the interconnectedness of all of this. And historically, automotive is a 100-year company, a 100-year-old mechanical company that didn't have anything connected. Now we want to have our iPhone in the car. We want to have our key fob. We want to start the car when the plane is landing. We want to have all of these capabilities, but with that comes risk. And we've seen a rash of, in the early days, we were seeing a rash of, the key fob getting stolen, right? It's easy to pick up that signal and grab the key fob and therefore steal the car. There's still a lot of, let me just go steal the car. We've also seen privacy issues. Privacy issues from the standpoint is everybody wants their iPhone connected in their car so they can listen to their favorite tunes or, call their favorite person or whatever. And that comes with a bit of privacy concerns. And Europe is really big on this. They passed something called GDPR. And this is to protect the people's privacy. Well, I'll give you a story of my buying a car from a dealer. So I didn't have a connected vehicle when I joined automotive. I thought I'd better go do that. So I did. And I bought a Lexus, and I bought a used Lexus. It was 2 years old. Beautiful vehicle. Get in it. They showed me how to connect my iPhone. They showed me how to, insert, go home. Like, here's my home address. Okay, great. So I get in the vehicle, go back in, sign the agreements, come out, put on home to navigate home. Well, it starts taking me these back roads, and I'm thinking, oh, this is an interesting way to go. And it was far from me, so I didn't really know my area very well. And I wind up, the car stops and says, "You're home." And I look over, it's not my home. In fact, it's about 2 hours from my home because it was the previous owner's home, right? And then as I went through the contacts, all of his contacts were in there, including his credit card information. When you talk about blockchain and the importance of that, we also want the ease of being able to go to the gas pump, fill it up, and not pull out our credit card, right? How are we securing that, right? So this will get back to blockchain. So I'll tee that up because I know that's a key thing. We want to be able to buy things. Maybe we're sitting in the back of the vehicle, but we still want to be able to get on that iPhone and do that search and go buy our shoes or whatever it is, right? So this interconnectedness, and not just personally, but then with the greater community that we live in, and with the smart city that we live in, and all these sensors and all of the traffic lights and everything else that are managing this. This is a huge system of systems challenge for all of us. And so ensuring the cybersecurity and building in that verifying that security is job one. It's understanding it, and it's what the automotive industry is doing. And I know that Omni-Air folks are doing a lot of this, the certification piece, the 21434, the standards, the type certificate, right? So aviation had type certificate a long time ago. When I came over to automotive 4 years ago, I said, you're going to have to type certificate your automobile, and then you're going to have to certify. You're going to have to do continuing certification that the architecture that you built for that vehicle to be autonomous or whatever it is, semi-autonomous, will have to be certified that against the current emerging cybersecurity threat, that your architecture, Mr. OEM, is still valid. It can resist that attack. That's not an easy job. And then we have to take the approach of building everything. It has to be embedded security. It has to be across the full life cycle. This gets into 21434 that was mentioned. It gets to the whole dynamic of the full life cycle of this industry, and it's pretty amazing times of what we're doing and what we're changing. Anyway, I'll maybe move it over to Matt. He can talk about blockchain a little bit.
Yeah, Matt, and I'm struck by all of this, that the next thing I want to do when we can get together is go to lunch with all of four of you and continue this conversation for a couple of hours, because I think we literally could do that. Mm-hmm. Matt, in your opening comments, you talked about the Tesla model, something we talked about previously, about how all of their cars are networked and can be shut down from a central location, which to a neophyte sounds like a single point of failure. And yet IOTA Foundation is working on a potential solution that would give the drivers back control. Can you expound on what Faye said and talk a little bit about DLT and blockchain and why that matters, why that should matter, both to Omni members and to people who are going to be buying these new vehicles?
Of course. So Faye, excellent remarks. Thank you so much. There's a lot of really good points that you pointed out there. To start, one of the things you mentioned around the automotive industry and the aerospace industry and how they differ is it comes back to that difficulty of scale, because with the aerospace industry, there's control, there's process, there's regulation, and there's ways to ensure that pilots have the necessary credentials to understand that process. And it's a much more in-depth process than me going to the DMV, getting my license and hitting the road. And there's a lot more systems in place for you to validate and verify that control. So there's already in place levels of transparency to audit what's happening at every moment, because you have a lot more people in one space, so the risk is a lot higher. So there's an immediate understanding that transparency has to happen so that you're mitigating that risk as much as possible. With the automotive industry, that's a lot harder because there's a lot more players in the game. There's a lot more automotive manufacturers. None of their systems work together. So the regulation and the transparency hasn't been established for the industry, because automotive's been around for 33 years, I believe, is the first internal combustion engine. So connected wasn't a thing in 1887. But now we're getting to the point where connected is scaling out to individual vehicles, and we're finding ways to connect to older vehicles. So how do we start to do that? And bringing that together is that's nothing that one organization can accomplish. That's such a huge insurmountable problem that it is absolutely mandatory that the industry collaborates and comes together for that. Because if that doesn't happen, then the solution's never going to come to fruition. But that's where our focus is really at too, because bringing these organizations together and participating in these consortiums is one of the things we very adamantly believe in at the IOTA Foundation. So we're active members in the Mobility Open Blockchain Institute. So there's a lot of other OEMs and hardware providers and initiatives that are active in there, where we're pushing out vehicle identity standards, we're pushing out vehicle to grid, electrification standards, we're understanding where wallets come into play, how could we use tokens potentially as a back end between different currencies so that there's a level of traceability but still security. So I'm just going to sit here and keep adding to your buzzword bingo card, David. So, but that's the best thing I can do to kind of break it down simply, because there's just so many different actions going on and activities that it can be overwhelming at a lot of times, but it's also very inspiring. So the other thing that's coming out that's pushing this is remote work from this COVID situation, because even with the other generations that aren't the millennials and aren't the older generation that are starting to get away from vehicles, I can do so much work from this device right now that it's amazing. My company's in Berlin. I talk to companies all over the world. I never have to leave my home. I can do it from the car, from my cell phone. I can go for a walk in the park and do the same thing. I accidentally muted. So that level of automation and remote work is also like enforcing the fact that we need higher automation, because if I can just get on a bus and get to work and still work while I'm on the way, that's productive time. I'm not sitting here for 2 hours in traffic doing nothing, getting frustrated. I'm actually getting paid because I'm still working. So that's great. And if we can continue to do that, that's an enforcer for automation and automated vehicles, and then automated supply and deliveries and all those types of things. But blockchain as a whole is really difficult to bring into that space traditionally, because pretty much all of them require heavy infrastructure. There's heavy compute, there's high energy consumption, there's integrated fees, and that has been pretty much a massive blocker for bringing this out from a security and an infrastructure perspective into mobility. But that's also the reason that I came to IOTA, because it's not the same way. It's focused on scale. It's focused on going all the way out. You can run the infrastructure on a smartphone, on a Raspberry Pi. You don't need a server to run it and connect to the infrastructure. It can happen all the way at the edge on-prem. You don't need a consistent connection. There are no fees in the network, and you can do data or value. So there's flexibility. If you want to secure data and have transparency over what's happening in different vehicles and different systems, you can start to do that. You can scale zero trust out to the mobility sector. If you want to start to automate vehicle to grid charging, if you want to have it to where I pull up to my Starbucks and my car pays Starbucks for my latte and I don't have to talk to anyone, I can just grab it, you can start to build those systems. So it's starting to come together, the vision starting to be seen by the more traditional OEMs as well. And it's just a factor of time at this point.
So I want to remind anyone that has a question, they can put that into our Q&A, I believe, Bonnie, or the chat box, whichever one it is.
Yep.
I think we could keep going till noon. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I've got 3 other big topics that I want to cover. And I want to pick up on the discussion Faye and Matt just had about differences between automotive and aviation. You can't go down to your local neighborhood and get your airplane serviced, but you can go to almost any major intersection in America, find a service station, a repair station, a car dealership that will repair or claim to be able to repair your car. As we get more connected, particularly in the software side, not the hardware side, what happens to the folks who want to work on their own car, who want to have a business repairing cars? Are we going to have geek monkeys instead of grease monkeys in the future? And everybody's nodding their head, but I don't know who to go to first. Raise your hand. Who wants to jump on this one? Char, you're the first one up.
So I think you will. And I think this goes back to the educational part, industry partnering with even secondary education, the high school dual enrolled areas, bringing back the automotive shops, right? The auto shop classes, but this time putting a technical educational component in with them. I think you are going to have geek monkeys under the hood. That's the only way it can happen, right? Is you have to have an understanding of mechanical communication, of the different protocols and how that happens, and then how the technology is involved in it. And that brings another piece to the table, which is, as Matt was talking, what was running through my head is, and Matt, forgive me if I'm paraphrasing correctly, but you're right, there is that movement. It's in the visionary stages. However, it's the transition that's going to be the hardest part. If you look at the transportation infrastructure right now, I mean, you have old switches, you have old fiber, you have old connections. You know, we have stuff that was put in place for transportation infrastructure back in the late 60s, early 70s that is still functioning and may or may not upscale. And even if you could upscale for connectivity possibilities, maybe you shouldn't, right? And so there's the cost of the transition from the infrastructure as well as the cars themselves into moving forward. So we're going to have that friction, right, between the where we want to go and having to maintain the older piece until we get there. That's my personal opinion. Please feel free to disagree.
So I agree with Char.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of there has to be transition. There always is when you go from one technology to another. But there also may be some breakthroughs. So we know that software updates are coming. Right now you have to go into your favorite dealer to get your nav stuff updated, and they thought they were going to make a lot of money on that. Well, hey, I can just use my iPhone. I don't need your updated software anymore. So now they realize they've got to stay with that, right? And there'll be other updates. There'll be other ways that they'll have to certify. So to David's question about will there still be those local folks? Probably, but there may be an added activity that either the OEM or someone has to certify that vehicle is up to the proper standard or fixed appropriately, I suspect.
So Faye, let me jump in there. And the issue is not theoretical. John Deere and International Harvester and others are in the midst of massive litigation. Jorge, will come to you next over the right to repair, where people buy $1 million pieces of farm equipment. Not all of them cost that much, of course, but where the hardware and the software is installed by an OEM, and the rules require that they are the only ones to be able to repair it in order to mitigate the liability of somebody interfering with the safety and security system. We have not yet quite seen that in the automotive world, but isn't it just a matter of time before the OEMs, before the equipment manufacturers, before the Omni Air members and communications folks say, wait a minute, I'm not going to let Bob, the mechanic, who is great at repairing broken tires, get into the electronics of my vehicle, even though you bought it. Jorge, I'll dump that into your lap. You're on mute, Jorge. Still on mute.
Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a real example, and it's happening in automotive right now. So I will not say the brand name, but we have a particular case where we were working with a security gateway, and this was put there by the manufacturer in order to avoid security problems that they have had in the past. And the main problem regarding to the introduction of this security gateway was that there were people changing the wheels and things like that, and they were needed to align some things in order to get this working, and this was no longer working anymore. So finally, what they did is curious. Someone found out that it was possible to bypass the security gateway by connecting directly the one canvas network with another. But by doing so in a connected world, probably it will be a security problem. And the curious thing is that from manufacturer perspective, they were some complaints because these people were not able to do that. And in our particular case, we have seen several scenarios similar to this one, and it will be happen. It will happen again, and in a connected with connected cars and so on, for sure. Because when in the past you were able, for instance, the tuning guys were able to extract the firmware in order to modify some car parameters. This is not possible today with encrypted firmwares and so on, and there is some kind of balance between user rights, right to repair, and security.
And now, while I try to find the mute button, Char, Matt, you want to weigh in on right of repair?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. So first off, the automotive sector has been doing this for a long time as well. I mean, if you look at a lot of OEMs, when they come out with a new model, they might change the screws. And that's an easy way that they've done to stop traditional shops from being able to do it. Because now, look what happens. You have these new hex bit safety screws, and you don't have the tools to do it. So how do you start to take things apart and fix them? You don't have the tools. You have to go to so-and-so OEM to do it. Or you have to buy a $1,500 tool from them, which gives you the ability to do it. And then you have no idea how to fix it because everything's different now. So even from the maintenance side, this has been happening with hardware or in a mechanical instance for a long time. But you're starting to see it open up as well from the software side. So if you look at things like automotive grade Linux, that's completely open source, and it's a completely open infotainment setup. There's a lot of things that come into play with that, to where an individual can start to learn how that operates and how it's on their vehicles. And you can see the manufacturers that are involved in that already. So you can start to build things that might go into your vehicle, or you can understand how it works from a software perspective. But from the larger vehicle perspective, like in the John Deere case, John Deere wants to resell their vehicles. They're trying to find ways to succeed and create new revenue opportunities as things get more expensive to build. But that doesn't mean they should stop the farmers and the mechanics from fixing their vehicles. They just need to relay the message and say, hey, we understand you want to do this, but we don't know yet how to allow you to do this while mitigating our risk. There are ways that are coming out with vehicle passports and things of that nature that could scale to that, to where there's a level of transparency on what's happening to the vehicle. But if they can say, hey, okay, you want to do that, that's fine, but this is the risk of what's happening when you do that. The value of your vehicle when you resell it might be lower because we can't certify what's happened anymore. So there's a confidence in what's happening there. And then from a security perspective, like if you look at the Tesla instance, if they can come in and shut down the locks for every vehicle on their network, then I'm fairly certain there's a way that you can get into their vehicles and then get into their network. So it goes up just as easy as it goes down. And them allowing access to that is a risk not just to their vehicles, but to their entire network if it's taken advantage of.
So we have 5 minutes, and I want to go into a lightning round of questions. So let's go pretty quickly. Let's pick up where you left off, Matt. Warranties, automobile warranties. What warranties are there that OmniAir members and their technologies should be looking at reviewing? And more importantly, what warranties does a consumer expect when they get a smart vehicle? Where to? Faye, start with you, and then we'll go around the horn.
I'm not sure I followed that question, David. Can you repeat?
Oh, you're eating into my time here,
Sorry.
Faye. Warranties, automotive warranties. What warranties should OEMs and aftermarket equipment people make on cybersecurity, and what should consumers expect?
Gee, I'm just going to pass on that. Sorry.
All right, good enough. Anybody else want it? All right, go, Jorge.
So from regulatory perspective, we need right now to consider updates. So we need to consider as part of the warranty how much time my car will be supported. This is something that is required in the new regulation in Europe for IoT, and is required in the new regulation as well in ISO and so on.
Matt, Shar?
Yeah,
All right.
I'd piggyback because like we do have drivetrain warranties and things of that nature, but when it comes to the software and the way the systems interact, it doesn't really exist. We don't have a warranty structure for that. So that's a very good point. I don't think I've thought about that specifically, but if you're buying a 2020 Mercedes-Benz and you spend $100,000 on it and it's got connected features, you want to have assurance that those connected features are still going to work for at least another 5 years. So there does need to be some sort of warranty mechanism to allow that sense of confidence from the user or consumer perspective as well.
There is one question. I'm going to get to it in a second, but Matt, your comment raised an issue in my mind, and that is if I buy the big $100,000 smart car, I want to make sure that my automobile insurance covers a number of things, including cybersecurity. I don't know of anyone that has yet looked at the cyber insurance aspect of automotive security, and I suspect the insurance companies would require some form of rider or separate deal than is currently available under their general policy. Shar, real
like
quick to you,
opportunity. Should we
real quick
start that
to
off?
you, and Frank Perry has a question that I will read. Shar?
So I have an actual concrete example for this. I'm deaf. I have a cochlear on one side and the latest and greatest technology left hearing aid on this side, and they're medical equipment, and I had to purchase part of them myself. I had to pay out of my pocket. Insurance didn't cover all of it. And so this one was $6,000 and this one was, you don't want to know how much. The point is, cochlear and resound insure and provide warranty for these devices for 3 years. And then I have the additional ability to purchase another 2 years. And that includes software updates, patches, fixes, repairs. I mean, these are complex devices for me to be able to do my job. When I worked for the government and I would go into a secret area, I had to get with cochlear and resound because of the transmission with Bluetooth and the fact that my phone controls them. And we had to do a risk acceptance form. So it could possibly be that something of that nature will come out of where we are going with the automotive industry. So if I'm buying a $100,000 Mercedes-Benz, and Mercedes-Benz says, okay, we're going to guarantee that software for 3 years, you have the addition, you have the opportunity to buy an additional 2-year update, but then after that sucks to be you. And as long as it's working, that's great. And but that's where I'm at. And this
Okay, Shar, I'm gonna have to cut you off. I want to get to Frank's question, and we're right up on about 30 seconds away, and that doesn't do him justice. Real quickly, Matt, I'm gonna put this in your job. Security can require the user to perform additional actions, manage additional passwords, have a deeper understanding of the vehicle. Can you discuss how OEMs can increase security but keep the user interface simple such that the owner does not need an engineering degree to operate their car? You have 15 seconds.
So that's happening in a lot of ways in this in the context of something known as decentralized identities, and it's allowing you to take control of your passwords and your interaction with systems. So it automates passwords and gets rid of the typical password because it's all private key, public key pairing. So that can be a little complex from a cryptographic perspective, but it can all be automated and locked down from a hardware perspective on your mobile device, on USB of sorts or YubiKey or things of that nature, to where your passwords are stored on a device. You don't necessarily have to enter them every time. It doesn't need to be a complex process, but you have control over that and how it interacts with the system.
Well, thank you very much. As I sent a note to Jason Connolly, we could go for another hour and I still would have additional questions. It's been a great panel. Faye, Francy, Jorge, Matt, Char, thank you so very much. It's been entertaining. I hope it's been informative. And now, Bonnie, back to you and the Omni Air group.
Thanks, David.